Welcome to Just Hauntings, Episode 7, where we review our investigation at historic Port Arthur. After being a location that we have wanted to visit for many years, we can definitely say now that this has been our favourite investigation to date. Port Arthur in Tasmania is a location that is a unique blend of both picturesque scenery and heritage buildings, quite unlike anywhere else that we've investigated previously. There are spots such as the Isle of the Dead where there is such a sense of peace and serenity, truly a beautiful resting place for the inhabitants of the 1800 plus known graves on the island. Port Arthur on a summer's day is quite breathtaking and picturesque. We weren't quite prepared for this, as we expected something a little bit more eerie and gloomy and depressing. Port Arthur at night, however, is quite different to Port Arthur during the day, and this is where our investigation took place. Port Arthur began its life in 1830, when a boatload of convicts and a handful of guards were dropped on the wilderness rugged shores of the Tasman Peninsula. Their charge was to establish a small convict-driven timber camp. What they eventually achieved, however, was something much greater. Within the first decade of settlement, not only had a profitable timber industry been established, but Port Arthur also had a bustling dockyard with up to 70 well-behaved prisoners employed in shipbuilding, as well as smithing, brickmaking and other trades lending to prisoner employment. Despite the successful merging of both penal punishment and industrial manufacturing at Port Arthur, ultimately it was not economically sustainable. By 1844, prisoner population at Port Arthur had risen to over 3,500, more than double what it had been at the beginning of that decade. This required over 2.5 tonnes of flour each day just to fulfill the bread rations alone. Endeavours of the 1850s and 60s sought to rectify this and restore Port Arthur's profitability. Fresh logging works were begun. The granary and mill that had been erected at the beginning of the 1840s were converted into a penitentiary, adjacent to which a new range of workshops were built to house a steam-driven sawmill, blacksmith's forge and a carpentry workshop. However, by the early 1870s, Port Arthur's once mighty torrent of labour had trickled to a soft stream, with most of the dwindling convict population either too old or insane to be put to the task. The last convict was shipped off the settlement in 1877. With its 5 decades of expansion concluded, its slow deterioration into ruins began. Our favourite building at Port Arthur began as a simple wooden cottage on high ground overlooking the entire convict settlement. The Commandant's residence was a building that was perpetually growing and evolving to fit the needs of the most senior officials who occupied it. Commandant Charles Booth was the first to take residence here following its completion in 1833. By March of 1837, he had constructed a new kitchen extension and converted the original kitchen into a study. By 1839, further additions had been made to the rear of the cottage. Following Commandant Booth's additions, his successors, Commandants William Champ and James Boyd, would each leave their signatures on the building, with further additions, demolitions and modifications that have moulded the house and its surrounding gardens into the imposing stately manor home it appears today. The Commandant's residence was the first stop on our nighttime investigation of Port Arthur. It was definitely the highlight of the entire night for us. The investigative crew consisted of myself, my husband Justin and our female tour guide for the night. The equipment utilised within the Commandant's residence was our digital voice recorder, our infrared camera, and our Connect camera, also known as the X-Cam. It is based on the structured light sensor camera invented by Bill Chappell. It uses Xbox Connect technology to map out solid objects. It identifies moving human shapes and creates a stick figure within the human. The X-Cam can also detect other things, stick figures with no human silhouette, appearing out of thin air and not visible to our eyes. Our standard format in each new location would be to separate, each of us with our own digital recorder, me with the infrared stills camera, and Justin with the infrared video camera. We would complete a walkthrough, and then we would usually end this with an XCAM session in anywhere that we felt was a hot spot. In conjunction with showing you our evidence captured on this particular investigation, it might also be worthwhile to tell you some of the more popular reported sightings in this particular location. At different times there have been different commandants seen within the commandant's residence, passing between what is now the commandant's study area and the new kitchen area. There is also stories of a young girl who is believed to be Amelia Booth, daughter of the original Commandant Booth to take residence here. Amelia did live a full life and pass away as an older lady, but many psychics and previous investigations at the property have identified her as having reverted back to her happy childhood era and is now back at the property. Whether or not this is the case, we cannot confirm. However, it is interesting to know this story in conjunction with the evidence that we have obtained. Our first piece of evidence captured at the Commandant's residence was an EVP. This was captured during my initial walkthrough of the property on my digital voice recorder. You can also hear in the background that I am taking stills photos with the infrared camera as I'm walking through the property. I'm asking questions on the basis that I believe that there is a child there with me who might like to play. Have a listen and see what you think.
Anybody want to play a game? What kind of game can we play?
Our second piece of evidence recorded in the Commandant's residence was also obtained during my initial solo walkthrough. As well as using my digital recorder, I was using my infrared stills camera. This photo is part of a sequence of approximately 100 photos, but I believe there are probably 3 key photos that really show this particular figure starting to manifest and then being fully manifested. Upon reviewing the photos, the particular location this was taken is behind a glass screen looking into what was the old kitchen at the Commandant's residence. You can clearly see myself with my infrared camera and the flash, and beside me appears to be a gentleman who definitely was not there when I took the photo. I definitely believe that this is one of the commandants who was keeping a close eye on me as I completed my walkthrough. We were definitely sure on the night that there were no mannequins anywhere on the Port Arthur property, nor were there any life-size portraits hanging anywhere in the Commandant's residence. This has also been confirmed since our return by the property themselves. There are definitely no mannequins that could have caused this image at the Port Arthur property. Our final piece of evidence from within the Commandant's residence was captured with our XCAM. The subject is myself sitting on the stairs with another entity who I believe to be Amelia. The XCAM is still relatively new technology to us, and this is probably only the 3rd investigation where we have actually used this equipment. We are trying to validate the footage by asking the entity that appears on the camera to interact with us or to follow direction to actually show that it is operating outside of us and something separate to us. So in this case I have asked the entity to actually reach out and hold my hand if possible, which I believe validates this more as a genuine spirit interacting with myself. However, this is put there for others to decide.
How old Amelia is?
Amelia's quite young.
Yeah.
But she will die young, and she will die.
Okay.
She's one of those ghosts.
She's reverted back to when she was happy.
She is staying as a little girl in all white dress. The last time my paranormal tour started talking about a dog.
just come closer if you are here?
She's on you.
Yeah?
Yeah,
I can feel it.
yeah, that's not you, honey.
That's okay.
That's
So
all.
who is this that's here with me now? Is this Amelia or somebody different? I have a beautiful dog at home, Amelia. Do you have a dog? My doggy's a boy and he's golden and he's a beautiful boy. He's at home with my 2 sons at the moment. Is there somebody there that can hold my hand? Yes?
Yeah.
Can we be friends?
She's there.
She is there.
Would you like to sit beside me on the stair? Thank you so much for coming out to see us.
She's gone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Port Arthur's separate prison was modelled after a new punishment philosophy, first introduced in the United States Eastern State Penitentiary Prison in 1829. Under this new system, physical punishments were replaced with solitary confinement. Every prisoner who came to Port Arthur would spend a short time in the separate prison, and those who misbehaved once moved out might find themselves returning for multiple terms. Inside the separate prison, dozens of rules and measures were implemented and fully enforced to train prisoners in the virtues of order and discipline. This was done through social isolation and control. Prisoners were kept in their cells for 23 hours a day. They were allowed only to read the Bible or a select list of books written to improve their mentality. All communication was forbidden, and to ensure prisoners were kept in silence, guards would patrol the corridors in felt slippers and only use sign language to communicate. There was still a further punishment for those foolish enough to misbehave inside this prison within a prison. Men who offended while in the separate prison could be sent to what was called a dumb cell. Laid behind 4 thick doors, here men could languish for up to 30 days. Completely devoid of any light and sound, allowed only 1 hour of exercise each day in a small yard by themselves. Only after 4 days in extreme confinement was this small amount of exercise mandatory. It was in this cell that we captured our only piece of evidence for the separate prison. Unfortunately, and due to reasons unknown, our X-cam did not record any audio during this footage. However, the visual footage itself speaks for itself. The parsonage was originally a two-storey building when construction first began in 1842. It served as a home to many ministers and their families who were sent by the Church of Ireland to oversee the religious studies of Port Arthur's convict population. Its first occupants were the Reverend Durham, his wife and their 6 children, who moved in following the parsonage's completion in 1843. In the early 1850s, the Durhams returned to Ireland, and the parsonages saw a number of parsons come and go before the welcoming of its next long-term tenants, the Reverend George Eastman, his wife and their children in 1857. Reverend Eastman would become known as the Good Parson by the convicts of Port Arthur for his kind and charitable nature. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1870 at the young age of 48. Many believe that the misfortune, mistreatment and poverty that befell his family following his death has prevented his spirit from being able to find peace. Reverend Hayward and his family moved into the parsonage in 1870. This followed the death of Reverend George Eastman, and the family stayed until the facility's closure in 1877. It is unknown whether any of Hayward's predecessors experienced any form of ghostly apparitions. The first recorded paranormal accounts relating to the parsonage date from the 1870s and were witnessed and documented by not only Hayward and his family, but also a number of visitors to the home. These accounts have continued for over a century. One often reported modern-day occurrence is the photographic capture of faces and figures in one of the parsonage's front windows. During our own day tour of Port Arthur, we snapped this photo of the said window. We are not sure if we captured anything or what we have is only pareidolia or a trick of the light, but we have provided the photo for you to decide. During our nighttime investigation, we had an interesting communication session with the divining rods. We believe this was possibly Reverend George Eastman. We also captured some unidentified orbs of light that seemed to appear and disappear out of a wall. We are yet to explain whether or not this was just dust, bugs, or something else.
Definitely use my energy. There's a lot right
Yeah, I see them all.
there. Yeah, I can feel it pulling. Can you cross them over for me? Keep going. Good job. But you have to cross them both. Thank you very much. Alright, now to prove that you're definitely here and that wasn't just coincidence, we need you to open them back up now. Can you push them open? Put them back so they're straight ahead like they were before. You're doing a fantastic job. So straight ahead, please. Excellent. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, we'd love to get to know you. So if you're a man...
Somebody just said something on the spirit box too.
Did they?
Did you just talk
I
on the
thought that was
spirit box?
outside. There's somebody outside talking.
Oh, is there?
If this is George and we're in your house, can you now push the rods all the way open? So we're not crossing them this time, we're pushing them all the way to the side. So if you're George and this is your house, push the rods all the way open.
So she's trying. Yeah.
You're doing great. Use my energy all the way open, please. Thank you, George. Keep trying. All the way open. Definitely use my energy. I can feel you in my arms at the moment. All the way. Brilliant. So this is George. Nice to meet you, George. I'm sorry that we're in your house. But we've heard so many good things about you, George.
Yeah, I was really interested in talking to you, George. You know, you're actually the one name that
It's a
stuck
good,
with.
positive name.
Yeah, I feel
Definitely.
really sorry for what happened to your family.
Yes.
I just wanted to offer my condolences.
We hope that you've enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed our first investigation of Port Arthur. If you'd like to find out more information about this wonderful historic location or arrange your own paranormal investigation, you can contact the Port Arthur Visitors Center. Open-air museums such as this rely on revenue from tourism to continue restoration and preservation works. So everyone that visits Port Arthur is contributing to its survival. We'd like to thank the helpful Port Arthur staff and guides that made this investigation possible. We'd also like to thank you for watching. If you'd like to keep up with our future investigations, be sure to hit the subscribe button below, and you can join us again very soon for episode number 8.